Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. A very warm good evening to everyone. I welcome you all to today's International Relations This Week episode. This is Wednesday 8 p.m. means it is time once again to discuss some of the most important news stories with regards to international relations in the past week or so. In today's session, we will be discussing about the anti-democratic riots that have taken place in Brazil. We'll be discussing whether or not there's a pattern that is developing in nations around the world with respect to these kind of protests. Then we'll be going to Israel and seeing what is it that the UN General Assembly now is concerned about with respect to Israel's occupation. Apart from that, we'll be discussing about what is happening in Myanmar. Myanmar recently observed 75th year of its independence on the British rule. At the same time, Myanmar also announced that they will be trying to bring back democracy in the country by holding free and fresh elections. Then I'll be taking you to Pakistan, where the Pakistan government is extremely worried and concerned about the rising number of terrorist attacks that are taking place, especially through the TTP. And then in the end, we will be ending our session after taking you to Europe. We'll be discussing what exactly is Europe doing with respect to countering the Russian dependence that they have with respect to natural gas. We'll be discussing whether or not Europe has finally found an alternative in the form of LNG. Is it worth it? What are the ups and downs about LNG that Europe is now opting for? But before we begin, again, a very quick reminder. If you have still not subscribed to our YouTube channel, please make sure that you do hit the subscribe button. Also share these kind of initiatives with all your friends who are preparing for the UPSC examinations. Now, without any further delay, let's see the first topic that we have for you. If you have been reading the newspapers all around the world, you would have seen photos of thousands and lakhs of people trying to storm the Brazil Supreme Court, the Brazil seat of the government, trying to take over the official offices of the Brazilian government. Now, most of these protesters are actually supporters of the ex-president of Brazil, that is Jair Bolsonaro. Now, Jair Bolsonaro recently lost the presidential election of Brazil and he was replaced by a new president, that is Lula. Now, this is a very unique kind of a pattern that is now being seen developing all around the world. You saw what happened in the US when Donald Trump came very, very close to losing the elections. You see what is happening in Brazil. If you have been reading the newspaper, just yesterday you saw what happened in Peru as well. In all these countries, there is a very similar pattern that is developing. The pattern is that when the party in power, when the leader in power starts to think that they might lose the upcoming election, they try to now send out information to their supporters saying that we have a lot of support all across the country, no one can defeat us in the election, it is impossible to defeat us. Meaning that if we get defeated by any reason whatsoever, it would be a fraud. Because we have conducted all the surveys, we have all the information from the ground, there is no one that can defeat us. Now, in such a situation, when the party in power actually loses the election, their supporters believe what they were told earlier. Their supporters were told earlier that if they end up losing the election, it would be nothing but a fraud at a very, very large scale. Exactly the same thing happened in US. Even today, a large section of the American population believes that the presidential election where Donald Trump lost to Joe Biden was a fraud election. Similar is the thing that happened in Brazil. Jair Bolsonaro, even before the elections took place, had been saying in all his rallies that people understand this. I have conducted all the surveys, I have all the numbers. We have a considerable amount of support from people all across the country. There is no way that we can lose the elections. If we do end up losing the election, it would be only because of a conspiracy. And that is what has happened. Although there have been a few weeks since the Brazil presidential election actually took place, the interesting part is ever since Bolsonaro lost the elections, his supporters were camping out in the open. So they were planning to attack the government buildings as soon as they got a chance. This was something that was actually coming and everyone could see that something like this would actually happen in the coming days, and now this has happened. Now, there are different ways in which the people in power can deal with this. One way in which the people can deal with this is what is happening in US. You set up a committee, you try to investigate the matter, see if you can press charges against those who have been guilty. However, in the US also, it is widely believed that maybe Donald Trump was the person behind all these protests, but he has not been charged with any of those so far at least. People who actually took part in these protests on ground, many of them have been arrested. In Brazil also, the new president has now vowed that anyone who was responsible for this conspiracy, anyone who actually took part in this protest, strictest action will be taken against them. If you look at the history of Brazil, Brazil as a country has seen a long military dictatorship as well. So people in Brazil are very, very wary of anyone trying to capture power forcefully. That is why the new president, the new government has made sure that all these protesters who are coming up and trying to acquire and capture power from the government are met with the strictest response possible. That is why we have a situation where an emergency has been called and a special session of the Brazilian parliament has already been called. The session would start in a few days. It is expected that the government of Brazil would call for a full-fledged investigation into this matter. These are the two people who are involved here. This is Bolsonaro. That is the ex-president, the outgoing president, and this is the new president, Lula, who was the earlier president of Brazil as well. Now, as I told you, there has been a situation where the protesters, that is the supporters of Bolsonaro, have been camping out in the open for many, many days. Also, even right now as I'm talking to you, all the protests have not stopped in Brazil. Even right now, there are multiple cities, there are multiple towns where the protesters are still ongoing, demanding that those elections should be cancelled and the elections should happen again. Now, the most interesting part is the leader of these protesters, that is Bolsonaro, the ex-president, he himself is not taking part in these protests. He is far, far away in Florida, that is in US. He is sitting in US, he is actually admitted to a hospital, he is undergoing certain treatment. So he is sitting there and he is saying that no, I did not do anything. My supporters have crossed the line. I did not tell them to do all these kind of things. But if you replay the speeches that he had given before the elections, if you replay some of the statements that he had made before the elections, it seemed like he wanted the exact same thing to happen. So now he cannot say that my supporters are now crossing the line. As I said earlier, the situation that is happening in Brazil is just one example of a larger pattern that is now being seen developed in democratic countries. Countries that have had a very long history and tradition of peaceful transfer of power. These are the countries where we see now when a party loses an election, they don't accept the results. They start saying that it's a conspiracy against them and we'll not accept the results. These kind of things are now being seen all around the world. This is also an indication of a strong man government. Strong man government. Now you might have heard this word strong man. Strong man is a word that is used to define a leader that takes pride in taking all the decisions alone by himself or herself, rather than consulting the cabinet, rather than consulting his or her ministers or secretaries. These leaders take a lot of pride in establishing their own image as the image of a very strong person. Donald Trump did the same, Bolsonaro did the same, there have been many other people who have been doing the same all across the world. These are strongmen governments, and this is a situation which now is being seen in many nations around the entire world. The second topic that we want to discuss is about Israel's occupation of land in the Middle East. Now, you might call it occupation, you might call it their own legal country. But now what has happened is, nothing new has happened on ground as such. But it is in the UN. The UN General Assembly has asked the International Court of Justice about their opinion on Israel's occupation of the land where Palestine once used to be an entire country. Now, this is not the first time that the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, has been asked to give their views on the Israel-Palestine conflict. This is a very frequent occurrence. However, the most interesting part here is, you all would know, when the International Court of Justice gives any judgment, it is not really binding on the nations. How? See, whenever ICJ gives a judgment, the responsibility to actually ensure that the judgment is abided by, that responsibility is with the UN Security Council. So let's assume in this case, even if the International Court of Justice says that Israel should vacate certain parts of land, Israel should vacate certain territory, that judgment would have to be enforced by the UNSC. Now, you all know how the UNSC works. The permanent members of the UNSC especially are not shy of using their veto or misusing their veto. So whenever they have a situation, whenever they think that their interest or interest of their friends are at stake, the permanent members of the Security Council do use their veto powers. In case of Israel also, whenever we have any issue about Israel, whenever there is any resolution against Israel, we now know that US does not really shy away from using their veto power. So US is one of the strongest supporters of Israel. That is why earlier also, whenever any judgment has been given against Israel by the International Court of Justice, US has ensured that it does not have any implications. Now, this General Assembly resolution, which was voted upon by various nations across the world, it was supported by 87 member countries, 26 opposed it, led by US, and India, usually the stand that we take, we abstained from voting. We were amongst 53 nations that abstained. Now, with respect to Israel and Palestine, India's foreign policy has been very interesting and it has changed in the past few decades. See, since our independence, 1947 to 1990s, or till the beginning of 1990s, India's foreign policy was that India was always a supporter of Palestine. In fact, for a very long time, India did not even have any official diplomatic relations with Israel. This situation changed in 1992. In 1992, when P.V. Narasimha Rao was India's Prime Minister, we finally realized the fact that India needs to establish diplomatic relationship with Israel as well. This signaled a big change in India's foreign policy with respect to the Israel-Palestine issue. Since then, India has been trying to maintain an even balance between Israel and Palestine. However, in the past decade or so, there has been another shift. In the past decade or so, India has been an open supporter of Israel. Whenever there have been voting on any resolution against Israel, we have not voted against it. We have mostly realized the fact that now the situation that we are in as a country, India, would gain much more by having better relationship with Israel as compared to Palestine. Now, the reason is simple. Palestine was supported, is still supported by most of the Arab nations. India wants to maintain good relationship with Middle East, with Arab nations due to various reasons. Most of our energy supply comes from the Middle East. A lot of Indians, thousands and lakhs of Indians actually work in the Middle East. It is also a big source of our remittances. Because of that, India, at least till 1990s, was always a supporter and open supporter of Palestine and a country that did not really talk to Israel. However, after 1990s, India realized the fact that Arab countries themselves have now started to realize that maybe the cause of Palestine is a lost cause. In fact, in the past few years, you have seen a lot of these Arab nations that used to speak against Israel have now one by one started to sign friendship treaties with Israel. So India has also realized the same, that we can actually gain a lot more by collaborating with Israel on various sectors, be it defense, be it environment, be it waste management, etc., where Israel has excelled considerably. I'm sure that all of you by now have read about the Israel-Palestine issue multiple times in the past. Let me give you a very, very brief history of the Israel-Palestine issue. Now, if you look at the era between First and the Second World War, millions and millions of Jews were killed in Europe. The Jewish community has always been a community that has faced these kind of massacres at the hands of various people. The Jewish community has always been regarded as a powerful, rich and business class community. However, in Europe, they have faced many massacres and persecutions. Hitler, for example, famously killed lakhs and lakhs of Jews. Now, it was somewhere near the Second World War that the Jewish community in Europe started to realize that they want their own country. They want a country set up specially for the Jewish people so that they don't have to run to save their life. That is when they, as in the form of a pressure group, tried to apply a lot of pressure towards many of the European nations. As I told you, they were influential people, businessmen who had a lot of money always. This is when Britain said, okay, let the Second World War get over. Britain said that we have a territory that we rule in Middle East called Palestine. We will try and carve out Palestine. Some part of Palestine will be given to Jewish people, and these people can now establish their own country. Why was Palestine chosen? Because it had the holy city of Jerusalem in this. Now, Jerusalem is a holy city for multiple religions, including Christianity and including the Jewish community as well. That is why it was decided that, okay, we will divide Palestine in such a way that Palestine, which was an Islamic country, will be given some territory and some territory will be given to Israel. Now, obviously, Palestine would not accept it. Not just Palestine, other nations of Middle East also did not accept it. In 1948, the UN gave a partition plan which was rejected by the Arab nation and Palestine, which is when we had the first Arab-Israel war of 1948. The Arab countries thought that they can defeat Israel very easily. It's a small group of people. They would not have enough power. But they did not realize that Israel had a lot of influence. They applied a lot of strategy. For example, because the Second World War had just gotten over, many countries in Europe had a lot of weapons which they were not using. So the Israel community, the Jewish community actually took a lot of those weapons and used them in the first Arab-Israel war. This led to displacement of about 7 lakh Palestinians. At the end of the war, the area occupied by Israel was much more than the area given to them under the UN partition plan. After that, a lot of wars were fought with Israel by the Arab nations one by one. There was a famous Six-Day War in 1967 fought by Egypt, Jordan and Syria against Israel. However, Israel has not been defeated in any of the wars. The Arab nations have committed a mistake of underestimating the power of Israel, of underestimating the nationalism that Israel has to save their own country. Now, we have come to a situation where almost the entire country of Palestine has become the country of Israel. Just to give you an indication, this is the map of Israel right now. If you can see here, this entire part used to be Palestine. Now, there are only 2 territories over here which are occupied by Palestine. One is this Gaza Strip. Again, Gaza Strip is something that you keep on hearing in the news time and time again. This is the Gaza Strip, which shares a border with the Mediterranean Sea, and other is the West Bank. West Bank, as you can see, is this area. Now, these are the 2 areas which are right now given to Palestine. But please remember, even in West Bank, even here, Israel controls most of the territory. Most of the territory, even in the West Bank, is controlled by Israel. And we'll just come to how exactly is it and what is happening. So basically, this entire part used to be a country called Palestine, and now almost entirely it has become Israel. This is again a graph to show you how different was it. So if you look at 1946, that is just after the Second World War, the area that is green was the Palestinian land and the blue part was a Jewish land where there were certain Jewish settlements. And then one after the other, the 1948 war, 1967 war, 2005, we have a situation where almost entire part of this territory has become Israeli land. As you can see here, although this is a part called West Bank, but even in West Bank, only some territories, that is a green color territory, is now Palestinian land. All other parts is now being acquired by Israel. Now, how has Israel done this? Israel has said that we want to have Jewish settlements in the West Bank also. So Israeli government has made Jewish settlements. Settlement means kind of colonies, housing colonies have been made in the West Bank. They have been given a very, very high level of protection by the government. So there is military that protects these areas so that they are not attacked by the people of Palestine. Now the UN General Assembly says that the ICJ must have a say in this. The ICJ must tell how this issue can be resolved. Now the interesting part is this is not happening for the first time. Even in 2004, ICJ was asked about their opinion. On what? In that same area of West Bank, Israel, as I told you, was building a lot of settlements for their Jewish population. Around those settlements, Israel was building many walls, security walls, so that the local Palestinian population does not really come and attack them. This was challenged in the International Court of Justice. International Court of Justice said that these walls are illegal, they should be rejected. But as expected, Israel did not pay any attention. The General Assembly, despite getting this kind of a verdict, could not ask the Security Council to get this verdict implemented. Now, this is a magnified map of the West Bank area. I am showing this to you to make you understand that even in the West Bank, most of the territory is occupied by Israel. Now, if you see this map clearly, there are different areas that are demarcated. There is something called Area A, Area B and Area C. Let me tell you what is this on the map. So this is Area A. And let me change the color here. Just a second. These parts are Area B and then these parts are Area C. Now, if you can just see the area on the map, Part C is the largest area. About 60% of West Bank actually is Part C. This is officially controlled by Israel. This is officially under Israel's control. While Palestine settlements are in Part A and Part B. Now, the problem here is multiple. Number one, a large part of this territory has been given to Israel. Second part of the problem here is, if you look at the quality of the land, Part C, the area C, has the most fertile land, while Part A and Part B does not have a lot of fertile land. So even if the people are settled there, it is not easy for them to earn any livelihood. It is not easy for them to make a living for themselves. Part C is the most fertile area which has been under the control of Israel. Now, how did this Part A, B, C thing come into picture? This was because of something called the Oslo Accords of 1993 and 1995. This was a kind of a mediation between Israel and Palestine, under which the West Bank was divided into areas A, B and C, and Israel was given area C, which is almost 60%. Now, Israel says that in our area, that is in Part C, we have allowed certain Palestine buildings, certain Palestine residential colonies. However, we only allowed about 33 building permits, but more than 7,000 homes have been built. So both the sides actually blame each other. Palestine says this entirely used to be our country. It is Israel that is occupying it forcefully, illegally. Israel, on the other hand, says that even if we are trying to help Palestine, their people, they are taking undue advantage of this, and that is why we will not give away any inch of our territory. Now, there is one more part of the story. Israel has a very interesting political system. It has a multi-party system. In fact, the votes in Israel are divided in such a manner that we have had so many elections in the past 3 or 4 years that it is very, very difficult to even keep a track of Israel. There are almost always coalition governments that are formed in Israel. When you have a coalition government, you also know, the problem is that the government can only take decisions after consulting each and every partner in the coalition. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu is back as Israel's Prime Minister for a 6th term. It's a large coalition that has been formed. In this coalition, there are a lot of very conservative parties that are in power. These conservative parties are those which believe that even 1 inch of territory should not be given to Palestine. They believe that the entire territory should be a part of Israel. So right now, because of the people in power, because of the coalition that is ruling Israel, it seems very, very unlikely that any settlement will happen between Israel and Palestine, at least in the coming few years. The next topic that we want to discuss takes you to Myanmar. As you know, Myanmar, at least in the past couple of years, since 2021, has been under the rule of the military. It was 2021 when military overthrew the government and they have taken up power. Now, last year, that is in 2022, the military did announce that we will have elections next year, we'll bring back democracy. Now, 2023 has started, but still, many people believe that this kind of a promise might not be taken up by the military. Now, the military in the 75th year of Myanmar's independence from Britain announced that we will very soon have free and fair elections. Now, as you know, Myanmar is one of those nations where the entire world is keeping an eye. US, for example, has been a key observer in what is happening in Myanmar. Aung Suu Kyi, that is Myanmar's highest political leader, the most famous political leader, she has been under arrest for a long, long time now. Military takeover of Myanmar is completing almost 2 years now. Most of the leaders of the biggest political party, that is NLD, have been under arrest. Their biggest leader, it is Aung San Suu Kyi, has also been in prison. I'm not sure how many of you know this, but she has a connection with India also. In fact, she did her graduation from Delhi University from LSR, Lady Shri Ram College. So she has had a very deep, very historic connection with India. She has been sent to prison, and one after the other, she has been put in the prison because of a lot of cases which her supporters say are all false. She is 77 years old and she has already been given a prison sentence of 33 years. In fact, this is not the first time that military has taken over power in Myanmar. Earlier also, military has taken over power in Myanmar multiple times, especially to ensure that she does not come to power. In fact, military has amended the constitution of Myanmar especially to keep her out of power. How? The constitution of Myanmar now says that Myanmar's highest position cannot be held by anyone whose children are not Myanmar citizens. That is done specifically for her because her children are not Myanmar citizens now. They have settled outside. To keep her out of power, especially the Myanmar constitution was amended by the military. This was during an earlier military rule. Now, again, she and leaders of her party have been under arrest for a long, long time. Now, there is something that has very interestingly happened in Myanmar. Ever since the military took over the power, all the other political parties, they came together to make one single coalition. That coalition was called National Unity Government, NUG. Please try and understand this. When the military took over the power, all the political parties came together thinking that let's first fight against the military. After that, we can fight elections and see who wins. Very similar to what happened when India had emergency. You also know when Indira Gandhi imposed emergency, all the opposition leaders were in jail. All of them came together to form the Janata Party to fight against one common opponent, that is Indira Gandhi. Similarly, here also in Myanmar, all the opposition parties or all the political parties have come together, made a group called the NUG. Not just this, the NUG, the political parties, have their own armed wing also that is fighting against the Myanmar military. So Myanmar military is still facing challenges, that is the NUG. Now, because the Myanmar military has announced that elections will happen very soon, now there are some discussions within this NUG also. Why? See, as I told you, this NUG, National Unity Government, is made up of different political parties. Some of them are now thinking, oh, elections have been announced. This is our chance to take part in the election and form a full-fledged government. NUG now thinks that military has announced this election so that the unity between the different political parties gets disturbed. They are saying that military does not have any right to announce elections. They are not the official rulers of the country, but the struggle between the military and the NUG still continues. Now, what has India got to do in this entire situation? Now, India is in a very precarious kind of a position here. India, as you know, shares a border with Myanmar. There are multiple states of India that share a border with Myanmar. At the same time, India right now is the G20 leader of the world. Now, India has tried hard to establish a position in the world where India is seen as a country which can resolve international disputes. There have been so many news stories that India wants to play the mediator role between Ukraine and Russia also. At this time, there are many countries that are asking a question to India, that while on one hand you are saying that you will be able to resolve Ukraine-Russia dispute, on the other hand, in your own neighborhood, there is a country where there is military dictatorship. There are people are being killed. Why are you not taking any action against that? Now, this presents a huge challenge to India for various reasons. See, on one hand, India wants to maintain good relationship with Myanmar. Why? As I told you, Myanmar shares a border with multiple northeast states of India. Some of these states have also been facing insurgency issues. So when Indian military takes up any operation in these states against the insurgents, many of them go away and cross the border and enter Myanmar, thinking that Indian army will not come to Myanmar. Now, in order to tackle that, India wants to maintain good relationship with Myanmar, so that if any of India's enemies go towards Myanmar, the Myanmar government can help India, and they have been doing this in the past few months. So on one hand, India wants to maintain that relationship. Irrespective of whoever is in power in Myanmar, we want good terms with the government so that we can ensure that India actually gets help from Myanmar if someone moves over toward the border. That is why, in fact, there have been multiple resolutions in the UN General Assembly against Myanmar where India has not taken part. As you can see here on the map, states such as Mizoram, there is Manipur, there is Arunachal Pradesh, all of these actually share a border with Myanmar. And that is why the situation here is very critical. India, as I told you, has stayed away from the UNSC resolution also against Myanmar. Not just this, in the New Year speech of the military leader of Myanmar, he actually thanked India for not voting against Myanmar. He said that we are working closely with our neighbors such as China, India, Thailand, Laos, Bangladesh. We'll work together for development of the region. Now, this stand of India has been criticized by many nations, especially in the Western world, again saying that if India wants to really establish itself as a country that can mediate international disputes, India should first start from its own neighborhood. Now, there are two ways to look at it. As I told you, the first way is that India should look towards its own interest. And our interest is that in our northeastern states, in order to maintain peace, not just peace, there are a lot of infrastructure projects that India is building through Myanmar to have an alternate way to reach our northeastern states. I'm sure all of you would have read about the Kaladan multimodal project. In the Kaladan multimodal project, India is trying to improve our connectivity to the northeastern states through Myanmar. For the success of all these projects, India needs to maintain good relationship with Myanmar, irrespective of whoever is in power. On the other hand, if India wants to ensure a good standing on the international field, on the international stage, India also has to prove that we can resolve these kind of disputes in our own neighborhood. For the next topic, I want to take you to Pakistan and the issue that Pakistan is facing. Now, in the past few months, or in fact in the past few years, Pakistan has been facing a lot of terror attacks, especially from one single group, that is the TTP, that is Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. They are the ones who have been fighting against the Pakistan establishment. Now, I'll take you back to a very interesting incident that happened in Pakistan. This was a time when Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State in the US. Hillary Clinton was in Pakistan. In a press conference, she very famously said, and in front of Pakistan journalists, Pakistan government, she very famously said that if you have snakes in your own backyard, you can be rest assured that the snakes will bite you also someday or the other. In very simple terms, she was saying that if Pakistan government continues to give support to terrorists, hoping that the terrorists will only attack India, the terrorists will only listen to Pakistan government, that is not the case. he gave a warning that the same terrorists will come and harm Pakistan as well. And that is exactly what is happening. 15 years ago, Pakistan military establishment very famously said that there is good Taliban and there is bad Taliban. They said good Taliban is one that is actually supporting Pakistan government. Good Taliban is one that is actually taking out attacks against other nations such as India, etc. Bad Taliban, they said, is the one that is not supporting Pakistan. Pakistan has had a long history of doing this, creating a distinction between good terrorists and bad terrorists. And now the same good terrorists are coming back to harm Pakistan once again. Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan has now undertaken very frequent acts of terror, extortion. In fact, if you look at border area between Pakistan and Afghanistan, in that border area, which is a tribal area in Pakistan, does not have a lot of development, TTP, that is Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, has almost controlled that area like a government. They are extorting taxes from people, they are doing the job of the government, and Pakistan government has almost no presence in that area. The interesting part is that the TTP is being supported by Afghanistan's Taliban that has come back to power. All of you would remember when Taliban came back to power recently in Afghanistan, Pakistan was very happy. In fact, Imran Khan, who was the Prime Minister then, had said that this is a true liberation of Afghanistan. They had said that we are so glad that Taliban is coming back to power, this is the true liberation. In fact, not just this, we had a situation where top military ISI personnel from Pakistan were going to Taliban, congratulating them soon after their takeover of Afghanistan, where people were trying to just go away from Afghanistan, they were trying to flee to save their life. At that point of time, Pakistan had not imagined that the same Taliban government to whom they are passing on their congratulatory messages, the same will now start supporting the TTP, which is what is happening. The TTP has been supported to a very, very large extent by Afghanistan and by Taliban that is ruling over Afghanistan. The challenge between Pakistan establishment and TTP is very, very long. Do you remember a few years back, there was a very deadly terrorist attack carried out in a school in Peshawar, where a lot of school children were actually killed in Pakistan in Peshawar. That attack also was carried out by TTP. The TTP, it is run by a lot of fundamentalists who want to capture, who want to take over Pakistan as a country altogether. They want to remove all the other political parties that are in power. The TTP claims itself to be a political party, claims that they want to take part in elections, but their modus operandi, their way of coming to power is something which is very, very different as compared to the other established political parties. For the last topic for today, I want to take you to Europe. As you know, Europe has been battling its own sanctions against Russia. The Russia-Ukraine war is about to complete a year. Russia has seen many sanctions imposed on it. European countries have tried to ensure that their supply or their import of gas, oil from Russia actually decreases. Although they have been able to curtail it, but the problem is Europe is now again seeing harsh winters now approaching, and Europe, in order to combat those winters, is dependent on Russian supply of gas. Now, in most of the European countries, the heating system is such as, let's say this is an entire city. In the middle of the city somewhere, there will be an infrastructure set up by the government where all the gas supplied by Russia and other countries will be used here to boil water. Once the water is boiled, it will generate steam. This steam is then supplied to all the different households using pipelines. So households are not supplied gas or anything. All the gas that is purchased by Europe from countries such as Russia, all of that goes to a central depository where water is boiled, steam is generated, and that steam is then supplied to all these different households, different establishments. Now, because Europe does not want to buy a lot of Russian gas, they want to cut off the supply, the one alternative that they have now found out is that they will be using liquefied natural gas, LNG, in place of Russian gas now. Now, Although it may seem to be a good idea, but there are certain issues with this. First, it will be costly. It's not wrong to say that Europe is kind of a spoiled kid. They have been spoiled because they are used to getting cheap Russian gas for many, many years. That is why they did not want to put any sanctions on Russia. It was only because of the pressure of US that they had to put sanctions, that they had to cut off their supply. So it is very costly. It is much more costly as compared to the gas that they used to take from Russia. Second, it is not environment friendly. It is not that environment friendly. So Europe, that used to lecture the developing nations such as India to curtail their pollution, saying that you should not go for development, you should conserve your environment. The same Europe now might have certain problems in achieving their own climate goals. Why? Because this LNG that they are using is not that environment friendly. It has now given an opportunity to USA, because from where will they get this LNG? They will be getting it from US. The supply has already started in northern Germany. The third part here is the problem of transportation. See, over the decades, Europe had invested a lot of money in building their supply chain through Russia. A lot of money was spent in building pipelines, etc., because they were always dependent on the Russian gas. Now, to start it from the scratch, to have transportation facility for LNG coming in from US is not going to be that easy. And that is why Europe is now all set to face other problems. They're expanding their imports of liquefied natural gas. They do have the money to afford it. But at the end of the day, as I told you, this gas is used to supply heat to households. Just like you and I, we pay electricity bill, we pay water bills. In USA, these people also have to pay a gas bill. So in US, the consumer's gas bill is likely to increase many, many folds. And it will also have a negative impact on the environment. As I discussed, LNG emits 10 times more than the piped gas. Thus, expanding this would have an impact on the environment as well. Now, liquefied natural gas is a liquid state gas which is rapidly cooled to minus 161 degrees Celsius. It is 600 times smaller than the original volume and it is half the weight of water. But again, it is very high cost. Why? Because the process of liquefaction is not that easy. In Germany only, the supply of this gas from US has started. Why Germany? See, in Europe, Germany has always tried to position itself as the leader in new initiatives. It was Germany that had announced earlier that we'll be shutting all our coal-run power plants. Germany was the one that had been focusing a lot on renewable energy. And now because of that, Germany now has to restart its coal plants. Germany has to look for other alternatives as well. They don't want to harm the environment. But this is a problem that Germany is facing. Now, there are many experts that say that while LNG, that is liquefied natural gas, would have a harmful impact on the environment, would be costly also. But the other part of the problem is the supply might just not be enough. See, Russia is a huge exporter of natural gas. Almost entire Europe, at least Western Europe, was dependent on Russia. Now, to have a substitute of that entire supply in the form of LNG is not going to be that easy. Even if you add up all the source of LNG that we have, especially from US, as per the experts, it would not be enough to compensate for all the gas that Europe needs. Meaning that in this harsh weather it is approaching Europe, consumers must get ready for not just high power bills, not just high gas bills, but also a very disrupted supply of heat from their own government. The climate impact is also to be seen in the long run. As I told you, the transportation would be much more, the emission would be much more. That is why we will have a situation where Europe might also not be achieving the climate change goals that they had set out for themselves at the UNFCCC. In terms of the cost, I'll give you an example of Germany. Germany, for example, would have an additional cost of $212 billion, doubling the bill of gas for its consumers, and the cheap sustainable energy sources right now do not seem to be available until at least the Ukraine-Russia war is going on. it is not really a permanent solution to Russia's gas shortage, and Europe would have to think of some other alternative. These were the important articles about international relations that we wanted to discuss with you from the last week or so. I hope you learned a lot of new things today. Again, reminding you, for any reason, if you have still not subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do hit the subscribe button. We'll be back next week again on Wednesday to discuss the next week's most important topics from international relations. Thank you so much for watching. Jai Hind.